Welcome 5th grade social studies scholars to another Passport to Social Studies video. My name is Mr. Giordano and I will be your teacher for today's lesson. We will be continuing with Unit 3, a United States case study, in our Day 4 lesson. The topic of our lesson is the complex histories of La Malinche and Pocahontas. Our focus question is, how does a country's culture influence the way it interprets its history? And our learning objective is to analyze, compare, and contrast two female historical figures important to the United States and Mexican history. Today, we will be learning more about the historical figures of Malinche and Pocahontas. I will be reading aloud a text to you about these historical figures, and you will be following along on your copy. The reading is called La Malinche and Pocahontas by Camilla Townsend. You can annotate and take notes either in a notebook or on your student workbook pages, which are pages 70 to 73. I will be modeling how to closely read and annotate using an interactive Jamboard copy of the text. It's also important to know that this lesson will be split into two separate videos for your viewing. Here are some resources that you also want to take a look at before we begin today's lesson. The first is a PDF copy of just the text by itself. I'll show you what that looks like right now. It is a copy of the text that we'll be reading shortly that you'll be able to write on and annotate as we read through it. It also includes the discussion questions that we'll be taking a look at the end of the reading. The second resource is a Jamboard that we will actually look at together. So I'm going to hold off on showing you this until we get up to that part of the lesson. But just so you know, if you click this hyperlink, you'll be prompted to sign in and make a copy of the Jamboard for yourself, which you can see right here. Last but not least, we're going to take a look at the Unit 4 Complete Student Workbook, which is the entire workbook for this unit. You can also make a copy of this for yourself and then flip to pages 70 to 73 in order to view today's activity. So let's get started. There are lots of ways that a country remembers important people in its history. Sometimes they name bridges or roads after them, like the George Washington Bridge or Malcolm X Boulevard, or airports. What are some New York City airports named after? You could think about LaGuardia Airport or JFK Airport. They sound certainly very familiar. And some schools are also named after important people. Is your school named for an important person? Sometimes a country will put the image of a famous person on a stamp or even have a statue made of them. Sometimes a country can change its mind about who should have things named for them. Do you remember the lesson we did a few months ago on Christopher Columbus? He was certainly important and famous, but not everyone thinks we should make a statue or a holiday for him. Today, we are going to study two women, La Malinche and Pocahontas, who are very important to the histories of Mexico and the United States. In both cases, what people remember about these women has changed over time. As you learn about La Malinche and Pocahontas, think about the reasons why people change their thinking about the importance of each woman. In the folder that we looked at in the beginning of this lesson, you'll again see the reading of La Malinche and Pocahontas written by Camilla Townsend. As a reminder, it is in the workbook, pages 70 to 73. You can open this document and begin to prepare yourself as we begin to read. We're going to read this text together as a group, and as you read, you want to consider the following questions. How are La Malinche and Pocahontas similar? How are they different? Why are they important figures in their country's history? And why have people's opinions about each woman changed? Again, we're going to be looking at this reading in an interactive Jamboard where you can annotate directly on the text. When you're finished with the reading, you're going to have some questions to take a look at based on the text. Here are the 4 questions that you'll be looking at following our close reading of today's text. So let's get started. I'm going to now turn to our Jamboard, which will show us the text that we'll be reading today. As a reminder, you can also go back to our beginning slide with our goals for the day, and you can click La Malinche and Pocahontas Jamboard, which will then prompt you to make a copy of this interactive Jamboard for yourself to write on. Okay, social studies scholars, let's get started. So, the topic that we're looking at is friend or foe, La Malinche and Pocahontas, and national identity. The directions for today is that we'll be reading a text about two historical figures, Malinche and Pocahontas. You can press the right arrow above to turn to the next page and begin reading the text. You can also annotate the text using the pen feature in this left drop down menu, and you see this little arrow. You can click that, and you can then change the color of the ink as well as turn it into a highlighter where you can highlight directly on the text. You can also use the sticky note feature down here, which will allow you to add sticky notes to your annotations. As we begin reading today, we're also going to use this highlighting key to help us keep track of our annotations and the information that we read. Anything that we annotate in red is going to be for La Malinche, any important information about her. Anything we highlight in blue is going to be about Pocahontas and any important information that has to do with her and her life. And finally, anything in green will be about both women, where the text discusses both women and their experiences. Let's turn to the next slide. Before we begin, let's make some predictions. We want to ask ourselves, what could the author's purpose be and the text structure be for this reading? We want to think about author's purpose, or PI, as you might have learned in your ELA classes, which is to persuade, inform, entertain, and even sometimes explain. Explain is more of a how-to guide, explaining how to do something, which sometimes we see in different texts of steps for how to create something. So ask yourself, what might this text be? To persuade or convince someone of something, to inform or teach someone something new, to entertain and allow someone to have an experience or a journey as they read through the text, or again, to explain or show someone how to do something. You can then use your pen feature to circle what you think the answer might be. I'm going to predict that it's going to be about informing. Next, we're going to think about text structure. This is the way that the text itself is organized. Is the text going to be comparing and contrasting two different things, or maybe even more than two? Is it going to talk about a problem and a solution that a character might face? Is it going to be a chronological or sequential type of text that goes in order of events? Or will it be a cause and effect type of story? I'm going to predict that it might be problem and solution, but we'll see as we read the text together. Okay, let's click back to our cursor and turn to the next frame. Okay, boys and girls, so you can see that I already jumped into the text and began annotating to really allow you to see what some powerful annotations might look like on the text using our highlighting feature and in our sticky notes, where we're actually writing quick marginal summaries of the text that we're reading together. And as we're reading, we want to record anything that we think might be important information about Malinche and Pocahontas, especially thinking about the similarities and differences between their lives. So let's start reading. In the rainy season, white egrets or tall birds gather near the coast of the Gulf of Mexico in a great noisy flocks, alighting or landing by the hundreds on the trees at sunset. The 12-year-old girl who would one day be called Malinche would have never seen them there when she was a slave among the Maya, an ancient civilization. She had not been born a slave. She had been born further up the coast in about the year 1500, and when she was young, her village was threatened with attack by the Aztec Empire. In a desperate effort to prevent being conquered or taken over, her people had offered tribute, or gifts meant to show gratitude, respect, or admiration to the Aztecs, including a group of young girls who could work as servants. The Aztecs sold them to the Maya, and so it was among the Maya that the girl grew to womanhood. So you can see there's important information here highlighted in red, and I even put an M to remind us that anything in red is about Malinche. So we're learning so far that she was a slave to the Mayas. We also are learning so far that she was born around the year 1500 and that her village gave a group of girls as a gift to the Aztecs to avoid warfare. And the Aztecs sold the group of girls to the Maya. And Malinche grew to womanhood among the Maya. Again, boys and girls, as a reminder, you can always double click your sticky notes to add to your annotations. And another good tip would also be to use this laser pointer to help you track your reading as you're going along. I'm going to continue to use this laser pointer as I read aloud to you. Let's keep moving along to the next part of the reading. Again, as we're reading, we want to remember the differences between Malinche and Pocahontas. So far, we've been introduced to Malinche. I have a feeling Pocahontas is coming up very soon. Later, the Spanish explorer named Hernando Cortez arrived and attacked the Maya towns. In an effort to make peace, the Maya used the same tactic or approach that Malinche had already experienced. They offered tribute to their enemies, including a group of slave girls. So it was that one April day in 1519 she found herself among the bearded strangers from across the sea. She had no choice but to wrestle with her fear and face her future among the Europeans. Many other young Native American women found themselves in similar situations when the European colonizers began to arrive in the Americas. I'm going to pause here for a minute. I have a feeling that they're about to introduce somebody new who might be able to relate to Malinche's experience, especially because they're saying many other Native American women. This is the perfect segue to introduce another character into the text. So let's see what the author has to say. Almost exactly 100 years later, in about the year 1600, another baby girl was born to one of the minor or less important wives of the high chief of the Powhatan Indians in today's Virginia. She would later be given the name Pocahontas. When she grew older, she too became a prisoner of the frightening newcomers. Okay, so let's take a moment now to put on our thinking caps and think about some similarities we're hearing between Pocahontas and Malinche. There's certainly some things that stand out to me as I was reading. I think you guys are on the right track. Both Malinche and Pocahontas were prisoners of the Europeans, and they faced similar struggles in how they were raised. So I certainly think that's an important annotation for us to jot down. Some other important notes that we want to jot down as key takeaways of this paragraph is that the Maya gave a group of girls, including Malinche, as a tribute to the Europeans. Malinche was also brought to Europe. And then the introduction of our new character. 100 years later, Pocahontas was born in today's Virginia. So this paragraph is interesting because we see a split from the red annotations to now some blue, introducing a new character. I have a feeling the author is soon going to show us how both girls experience similar things along their lifetimes, and we might have to start annotating in green. Let's go to the next frame and see. Okay, let's get started. At first, as a little girl, she had been curious about them. When in 1607 the English established a fort at the place they called Jamestown, she visited the settlement, or a group of people living in an organized way, and impressed the strangers by doing cartwheels. When Captain John Smith spent some time with her people, she taught him some Powhatan words. But later, in March of 1613, the English kidnapped her, demanding that her father supply them with food and provide whatever other aid they might need. Her father refused to play into the hands of those he viewed as treacherous or dangerous and disloyal, kidnappers, and so Pocahontas was left as a prisoner among the English for over a year, facing her future alone. So the English established a colony that they called Jamestown. And Pocahontas, she impressed the Europeans. She even taught them Powhatan words. And this is a little different than Malinche's story, right? In Malinche's story, we really didn't hear about her interacting with the strangers in this type of way, almost bonding with them in a friendly type of manner. So this is actually something that stands out as a difference between Malinche's experience and Pocahontas' experience. The English also kidnapped her, Pocahontas, and tried to convince her father to give them resources for her return. And last but not least, Pocahontas was a prisoner for the English for over a year. And this is very similar, right? We can certainly see a connection here to Malinche, who was also a prisoner to or for the Europeans. Let's keep reading and see what happens next. Okay, social studies scholars, this lesson will be continued in a second video where we will finish our close reading of La Malinche and Pocahontas by Kamala Townsend. Stay tuned and I will see you in the next video.